So here we are sat in Woolly Woolly in Camberwell Green. I'm here with Marie Leconte. Marie, thank you very much for coming on the corner table.
Obviously, happy to be here.
Could you tell us why you've chosen Woolly Woolly as your corner table of choice?
Oh, well actually, so I sort of have a long, complicated history with dumplings. The Chinese kind, to be clear, because I've talked about dumplings on Twitter before, and people think I'm just obsessed with the kind of, English, like balls of dough. To clarify, that's not what I mean. But no, I was convinced I didn't like them for the longest time until my friend Francis was like, listen, there's a good spot in Soho, like, let's go together, try, like, it's on me anyway, so it's fine. And it was such a discovery, and it was such a beautiful moment. I was like, maybe this is my favourite food. And since then, I've kind of been eating dumplings as much as I can. They're a really good hangover food. That's kind of my tip. Like, if you're feeling really, really horrible and you're at home after a night out, they're a really good thing to order and eat in bed, because they're basically finger food, but also quite greasy without being too greasy. But anyway, so Francis used to live around the corner in Camberwell, my friend, and brought me here once, and I really enjoyed it. And so I thought, why not come back? Now I have an excuse to come back. And I kind of live up the road anyway, so I'm a South Londoner. So yeah, there you go.
Normally I would just dive straight into what we're going to talk about, which is of course your book, but perhaps we should avert our attention to the menu. There's so much to choose from. What do you fancy?
I think I was literally just going to go for a large selection of dumplings.
Is this in aid of a night out last night?
It's not actually, no. I'm fine. It's just, I just really love dumplings.
Yeah. I'm completely with you on that. All right. Do you want to reel them off?
Yeah, sure. Can we have some grilled pork and chive dumplings, please? Some prawn hargao. Some pork and prawn sumai. I still don't really know how to pronounce it, but tulongbao crab and pork dumplings. How many is that?
About 4.
4? Okay, and then can we have some chive and prawn dumplings? And actually a second helping of the grilled pork and chive. I do feel quite strongly that if you don't feel a bit ill after eating dumplings, you didn't eat enough of them.
Where did the urge to write this book come from? Quite brave to break the fourth wall in the way that you do.
So basically, it's a deeply unimpressive story in that. So I went freelance in the summer of 2017, and I'd kind of always wanted to write a book. And then after going freelance, actually quite a lot of people said, well, surely now is the time if you want to write a book. But I did have this slight problem of not knowing what I wanted to write a book about. And life kept sort of like getting in the way. And then, so I think one night in April 2018, I couldn't sleep. But, that's like specific sort of insomnia as well, where sleep is not coming anytime soon. And so I kind of sat there in bed and I was like, you know what? I can think about it now. It's not like I'm going to get to sleep before 4 or 5 a.m. anyway. And it's okay, what do I care about? So thank you.
Thank you.
I was like, let's try and think about it in a different way, not just what should I write a book about. I sort of like try to flip it. It's like, okay, what do I care about? What do I find interesting? Like, so interesting that I could spend quite a lot of time working on. It's okay, well, politics, that's the obvious thing. Like, I care about politics. I write about politics all the time anyway. And within that, what's the thing? And I was like, oh, actually, gossip. So I, before being a political reporter, I was a diary reporter at the Evening Standard. Actually, it was sort of like the Evening Standard's political diarist. So I kind of did basically political gossip for a living, which I think few people ever get to do. So I feel very happy to have been able to have that job for a while. And I was like, okay, gossip. Political gossip. And it was the weirdest thing, actually, because I was kind of sitting there in bed thinking, someone must have written that. Like, I'll keep thinking about it. But realistically, it seemed like such an obvious topic to me. There's like, surely someone's done that. And so I actually came up with the title, Haven't You Heard? On that same night as well, still not able to sleep. And then woke up the next morning, Googled for every keyword I could think of. And I was like, oh, no one has written a book about political gossip. This is really weird.
I have to say, when I started reading, I was also surprised. I thought, surely somebody has attempted to, in that way, break the fourth wall with the public and say, actually, this is the reality. But when I researched, I couldn't find one either. And I thought, well, this is quite remarkable. This is the first time anyone's really tried to report about something that you would have thought would be kind of a goldmine for anyone who attempted it previously.
It is, but I suppose that... And I think, and again, that's kind of why I find gossip really interesting, is that most books about politics, be that memoirs and stuff that's more topical, will always include a lot of gossip. Some of them will include even, some bits on the raw of gossip, whatever, but no one ever really bothered, I think, to just take it as a topic, not like as a full thing, I guess, as opposed to like one ingredient. And basically it's just, the next morning, Google couldn't find anything. took to Twitter, as I do, to say, okay, I think I have an idea for a book and I think it's quite good. How do I proceed? No, I think I said exactly, I have an idea for a book and I think it may be good, but also it may be bad. And, who can help me figure it out? And this woman, Imogen, got in touch. She was like, hi, I'm a literary agent. What's your idea? So I said it in a few lines. She was like, that sounds interesting. Do you want to have coffee next week? And so we did. And literally I just because I think I was having quite a busy week. So just on the way, on the tube there, in my notebook, I sort of try to write down just random thoughts, or at least make it look like I'd thought about the book more than I had. And then we kind of had that meeting and talked about it, and she really liked the idea, and I really liked her, and we really clicked. And so I signed with her, and then the rest is history.
And for anybody who hasn't read the book, it's important to stress that this isn't a book of gossip, it's a book about it. You describe the daily goings-on at the Palace of Westminster, what seems to mimic the structured routines of an archetypal English public school, it seems to me. I mean, how would you compare the sort of place Westminster is to anywhere else that people might relate to?
One of my favourite quotes, actually, in the book is from Paul Macedon, who's now lost his seat, but was a Tory MP at the time, who said, well, I feel like a lot of people come into Westminster trying to be Francis Urquhart, so, the chief whip in House of Cards. But actually, a lot of people end up being Regina George, so, the mean girl in Mean Girls. It's that, there's a lot of Regina Georges in Parliament.
Yes. So
there's definitely, I think, a strong... And it was, I didn't go to an all-boys public school in England because I'm French and a woman. But I think it is very much, it does have a school vibe. And I think another MP, actually, Bim Afalami, made the point that he was actually is kind of too kind to say that Westminster is like Oxford or Cambridge, like university. It's very much like school. Like normally people have grown up more by the time they reach university, whereas a lot of what happens is very much sort of like school level interactions. But I guess to kind of come back to the original thing as well, it's sort of obviously it is a book about gossip, but it's kind of a book about the human side of Westminster, I suppose. And in that, and I think that's why I find gossip so interesting. Obviously as in hearing pieces of gossip, but also gossip as a concept, because nothing's more human, and actually a lot of the gossip is stuff about human stuff. So that can be, and I kind of willfully chose the widest possible meaning, I think, for gossip in the book. So that can be anything from I heard that X is shagging Y, all the way to I heard the government was going to release the white paper next week earlier than planned. And I do think that's such a fundamental part of human nature to, have a piece of information you should not be sharing with anyone, but actually you can't really help it. You will be sharing it with people, and then, stuff happens.
You quote someone in the book as saying that politics is about character and intention. What do they mean precisely?
Oh, okay. I remember actually that quote was Will Tanner, who used to work in Number 10 under
That's
Theresa
right.
May. No, I'm just impressed by how well I remember my own book. It's long. It's many words. Fundamentally, and that's why, because and that comes up in several bits in the book, and it's come up in conversations about the book since. There could be the argument, of saying actually, every workplace has gossip. Wherever you work, if there's people who work together Monday to Friday, there will be gossip, about work, about people's personal lives, and actually, that will happen everywhere. So Westminster is not special in that sense. But I think that what makes Westminster special is that actually these are the things that do actually define, whether someone's career will go well or not well, etc. So I think, one example, for example, is reshuffles, where it's never obvious why X person got that job or whatever. It's rarely a case of, well, that MP actually has ample experience from their life before Parliament in that area of policy, therefore we're going to make them a minister in that department. That's rarely the case. So I think, what they meant, so what Will said is that, what matters in politics, who you are, basically what you want to achieve. And that's, who you are, that's, trust is a massive thing in politics. And actually, if you can't be trusted, or if you can be trusted, that's going to massively, massively change the way people see you, the way people work with you, what people trust you with in terms of information and work, and whether they want to work around you. Because politics is largely a group effort as well. Actually, there's very little you can do alone. And what you want to achieve as well is, that defines, I think, every single bit of politics to an extent that it's actually quite hard to explain. So anything from, if an MP keeps leaking stuff to journalists, why they're doing it. Is it because they hate their leader? Is it because they want to become leader themselves? Is it because, they just love the attention, whatever? And actually that's going to change entirely how the journalists relate to them and how their colleagues as well, like their MP's colleagues, will relate to them. So again, I think that it's nearly quite hard to talk about, because I think those two questions matter at sort of like every single layer of politics, and again, to I think much more of an extent than in other jobs. And also, when you look at it from the outside, if you kind of bring in the rest of the country as well, and that's been proved time and time again. People don't vote for policy, like voters don't vote for policies or policy agendas or, who, whatever. They do it because, they look at the person, they look at, do they like that person? Does that person seem competent? Do they trust that person? I think we saw that in the general election last year as well, of people, actually, lots of voters like Labour's policies. They did not trust Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell to deliver those policies. So clearly, even from the outside as well, it is fundamentally about people. Like, politics is just about people.
How do you develop acute judgment of character? Do you have to have it as an instinct to begin with, or is it something that matures the more experience you have speaking to politicians and understanding when somebody's motives are deceiving and when somebody's being genuine?
I think it's a bunch of different things. Like, experience definitely comes with it. But I think it's quite easy, especially in your first few years. Like, in my case, obviously, I came into it through journalism. In the first years of political journalist, to be slightly starstruck, I think, by MPs. And also, as an age thing as well, if you come in your kind of early, mid-20s, a lot of the people you talk to will be the age of your parents, if not, or nearly. So I think, definitely, once you kind of lose that layer of like, oh my God, I'm talking to a minister, I think it becomes a lot easier for you to assess their character in a way that, that is more precise. But also, that's why, and again, so another part of the book is why, so that it's about how social networks, informal social networks matter massively. And that's, I think, a good example. Because I remember, so a few years into Westminster, actually, there were a few MPs I'd met a bunch of times, I really liked, they were always nice to me, we got along, etc. And then they gave me the time of day. And I thought, and from that I kind of deducted that there were nice people as well. And then I talked to friends who work for MPs. So, there's quite a large network of MPs' aides. Like, they talk, they've got WhatsApp groups, etc. And several of those MPs, I found out, were horrible bullies to their staff. And they were clearly nice to me because I was a journalist, but then anyone broadly my age, but, who worked for them, they treated terribly. And so I think that, it's not basically the trick to being a good judge of character is not just meeting someone, being able to assess them yourself. It's also being able to text people you trust to be like, that person, I've met them, they seem nice, what have you heard, what have your experiences been of that person? So it's very much, again, so I think a lot of Westminster is just a group effort.
The way you explain the role of Portcullis House in particular is fascinating. The place where politicians go to be seen and cut the figure of somebody who knows something others don't. Could you take us there for a minute and explain how it's become such an important space?
Portcullis House has basically been the great leveller of the Houses of Parliament, in that until then, because if you've never been to Parliament, it is a slightly weird. I was talking about it with a friend recently, actually, who recently got a lobby pass, and who pointed out that basically there are lots of bars and cafes and tea rooms, etc., but all of them have sort of like slightly different rules. So there are places where like only MPs can go, places where you can go, if you're X, but someone else has to buy the drinks. So in Strangers, notably, the bar, quite a lot of different pass holders can go, but only certain ones can buy the drinks, which is slightly confusing. Portcullis House doesn't have that. It's just one massive space that also looks very modern. It's just a canteen, effectively, that looks very sort of like early 2000s, where anyone can sit. And it's quite big as well, so and you can, and it's totally open plan, so you can see who's sitting with whom, etc. But that is the thing of anyone can go, so that can be like staffers if they want to have their lunches there. You can see ministers there. You can see sort of like anyone. And it is very useful because again, you can bump into, like, one of the people I interviewed for the book was quite funny, who's a lobbyist and so didn't have a pass for Parliament, but he said, basically the trick is that you have to get one person to get you into Portcullis House for one coffee, and then from there you just have to keep bumping into people and then you spend the afternoon there without ever going out.
These dumplings are delicious.
Aren't they the best?
Fantastic.
Did you just eat dumplings all the time in
All
China?
the time.
Most dumpling restaurants serve like 4 by plate, so I was like, actually, if there's only 4, then, This is what? So there was 6 by...
So you pretend like you didn't know this was going to happen. It's just like, this is your
genuinely
place.
didn't. I didn't come here that often.
You spoke just then about Portcullis House being the sort of great leveller, and you talk in the book about how, in many ways, the internet has become the next great leveller of political gossip. We're seeing politicians using Twitter more and more as a platform for their own self-promotion, to lock antlers with their enemies, to share their reactions to the news and so on. How much has this broken down the walls of the halls of power? Does it bear any relation to gossip in Whitehall as you understand it, or is it just there to make the public feel more included?
I think I'm going to answer the question slightly differently in that I think, and I think, it's a change that is very much happening at the moment, and that I hinted at in the book, But I do think Twitter basically opened a window into kind of political gossip and into, in general, what really happens in Westminster, etc. But I think that window is closing already. So when you look at quite a few of the newest intake of MPs are not on Twitter and have no interest in joining it.
So when was the window opened? And when did it start closing?
I'm not sure. I would say probably slightly before my time. So I would say sort of early... I don't know, so like maybe 2012, 2011, 2012.
Okay.
Probably it started, or whenever Twitter basically became quite a bit of a thing. But I think it's also worth looking at things like Guido Fawkes, and the fact that Guido Fawkes was absolutely massive when it first launched. And when you talk to people who were around Westminster at that point, it was partly because of the content of the website, but partly also because and we forget because it was not even that long ago, but about 15 years ago, I want to say. It was completely novel for a website to update with new stories of 5-6 times a day. That was something that felt completely novel, and actually people were kind of, bored at their desk somewhere in SW1 going okay, what's going on now, and I'll refresh it now in case there's a new story, etc. And I think part of the reason why Guido has been in decline over the past few years is that Twitter has kind of started filling that role. But equally, I think, and that's kind of the sort of the conclusion of the book, is that I do actually think that some gossip should probably stay private, and actually there is a rule for gatekeepers, so be that, journalists who decide whether to publish a story or not, or gossip columnists deciding to either, make some stories, name people in their stories, or keep some of the stories anonymous, etc. Because, and actually the later bit of the book that deals with that, there's clearly a problem of, A, conspiracy theories, but B, also the fact that, again, if you get bits of information, I think, on Westminster without necessarily knowing all the context, then it's really easy to see the worst possible thing, especially if you're looking into it in bad faith. So I think I can remember, it's a dumb thing, and it's not quite gossip. Was it Stella Creasy, I think the Labour MP, bumped into Matt Hancock, the Tory minister, at a gig, and they took a selfie together at the gig or something, going we're cool young MPs, whatever. And Stella got days and days and days of abuse for basically being friends with the Tory, when actually, if you look at Westminster, there are so many cross-party friendships, but in a way that I think people don't necessarily realise from the outside. So again, I think there's basically that does need to be, there are good sides to there being a bubble, if that makes sense. So I feel like I'm just rambling now. But effectively there is an inside and an outside, and I think there's information that clearly benefits from being, broadcast to the outside, especially stuff that's in the public interest. But there are things that actually I think it is in everyone's interest to keep on the inside and within the bubble.
How do we determine then what gossip within Whitehall is in the public interest and what isn't, when a story can be written in 280 characters?
It's nearly impossible. And there's a bit in the book which is, I think, one of my favourite bits. But I actually asked, so I interviewed quite a lot of quite senior political journalists, and I asked all of them, so including editor-in-chiefs of newspapers, etc. And I just asked, okay, what's gossip, what's news? Can you tell me the difference? We're sat here together, just run it past me now.
It's a great question.
The difference, and every single one of them kind of didn't say anything for quite a long time, and was and eventually they all gave quite different answers. But I think broadly speaking, there is no, I think what the conclusion of that experiment is that there's no straight line between something that's news, something that's gossip. So it can depend on, and I think, again, that's one of the issues. I think from the outside it's probably quite easy to see journalism as, a story is either a story or not a story, when actually we all function in grey areas at all times. So it can depend on which paper you work for. So, there's stuff, obviously, that will influence, the Tories doing a stupid thing. A Tory MP doing a stupid thing is more likely to be published by the Mirror than by the Telegraph, and vice versa. There's who your editor is as well. So I think specific editors, some of them will be really rigorous and saying, we'll only publish stuff that's in public interest and triple source, etc. Others will be like, what, it's quite fun. It's just quite a fun story, let's print it. And there's a bit of a tabloid broadsheet line between the two, but not necessarily, I don't think it's entirely that either. There's whether it's a slow news day or not, because, papers need to be filled. And that's, I think, something people don't necessarily want to hear. But it is the fact that, occasionally stuff will be published that's a bit dumb, and that's not really a story, because there was a hole on the page, and it was getting, closer and closer to the paper having to go to print, and they just stuck a story there that's not really a story. So there's that. There are so many different kind of, metrics. And one of my favourite ones, which I mentioned several times in the book, is It's just like, I mean, which I call the banter defence, of like clearly just stuff journalists thought was funny, and so they managed to come up with a public interest angle to it. So I think my all-time favourite of that was so Simon Danczuk had some sort of affair with a young woman, and if you look at it, actually, it's really unclear where the public interest lies at first, because he was separated from his partner at that point, so he was a single man. She was a single woman. She was not underage. It was all entirely consensual. So in that case, why is that a story? And there was lots of great colour in the story of, like, I think she leaked the text they were sending each other, and it was in 2016. And I think she'd asked him, she was like, Simon, you're an MP. Like, what would happen if we end up leaving the EU? Will we still be in Eurovision? And Simon Danczuk replying, tonight I'm going to fuck you so hard you're going to forget about fucking Eurovision. Very funny. Clearly, the paper just wanted to print that. And the way they managed it was, so apparently they once had sex against the desk of his constituency office. His constituency office, which is paid for by the taxpayer, and taxpayers deserve to know what is being done with their hard-earned money. So there's a lot of that as well. Basically, I think the conclusion is that public interest can be found if needed.
That's right. There is that point in the book where you explain why certain stories out of Whitehall get covered in the press and others don't, and how those four words, paid for by taxpayers, have the power to make anything and anyone newsworthy if their misconduct involves even the most tenuous use of a tax-funded asset. That's
that,
exactly
and
the story you tell.
The other big one is blackmail risk. Mm-hmm. So especially around sex stuff, if someone's on a sex thing that's like very funny and or embarrassing, but technically not illegal, what you do is that, especially if there's an elected official or someone anywhere near an elected official, going, if Russia finds out, they could blackmail them. So that's why we're printing it. And it's like, yes, it is. Yeah, brilliant. Well done. Well done. You've saved us from Russia.
What allows most people to have faith, I guess, in the machinations of politics is a sense that the system which connects Whitehall to the City of London to Fleet Street and so on is inevitably bigger than one individual. But you do write about the way in which certain personalities occasionally do manage to ingratiate themselves so well that they avoid the rule of scrutiny. I'm thinking less people who are trying to get to the top, but more people who have a very authentic and agreeable relationship with the press, say, whereby the press actually step back and say, we're not going to do to this person what we could because we know Tessa. It's
a tough one, yes. I mean, actually, in that example in the book was probably one of the toughest decisions, and I had to ask a lot of friends for their advice. So, because Tessa Jowell's husband had some dodgy dealings with his side work. And long story short, she definitely should have been made to resign and probably, not join frontline politics again because it was not certain how much she knew, etc. But basically, so I interviewed again quite a lot of journalists, and two of them, without me bringing it up, brought up the specific example of Tessa Jowell, saying, actually, it was probably our rule. We probably should have made her resign or could have made her resign if we'd really gone for it. But actually, all of us clearly had that thing. One of them put it in a really beautiful way of saying, as we're about to dip our pen in the green ink, we kind of stopped, and when actually, we like Tessa, we're not sure we want to do that to her. But then there are other examples as well. So because I was writing the book around the time of the Andrew Griffith sex scandal, so the minister who was found to have sexted, woman, was it 2,000 times in 2 months or something. And I remember obviously talking to people about it because it was quite recent news at the time. And what a few people said, they were like, well, actually, most of what we learned from that story is that people clearly did really like Andrew Griffith. Because, and one journalist who I think didn't want to be named said, well, actually, I can think of certain MPs where if they'd done the same thing, probably quite a lot of us would have been able to say, actually, you know what, he's probably just going through a shit time. Or, and there's an argument in saying that actually Andrew Griffith came afterwards and saying, I had really bad mental health problems and I was basically having a breakdown. That's how it manifested. Had that been a more likeable figure that journalists knew better, maybe they would have been more amenable to it. But I think, the point that journalists made as well, which I'm really keen to kind of talk about, I guess, because I think people forget it a lot, is that it's rarely an entirely conscious decision. And again, you can bring that back to normal, a normal outside of politics situation of whether you like someone or not will always influence how you feel about their actions. So, and then let's say a work Christmas party, if you see two people snogging, if one of them happens to be your best office mate, it's considerably more likely, like, even though like, she has a boyfriend, it's going to be more likely that you'll be like, actually, you know what, her relationship is actually quite shit and her boyfriend is quite rubbish and she was really drunk and she's going through a shit time at work, like, fine, it happens. If it's your office nemesis doing exactly the same thing, do you really think you will think the same thing and have so much, like, compassion and understanding of why she drunkenly snogged someone else despite being in a relationship? So I think that, it's not, again, like a lot of these decisions, I think, are not conscious, and that's not, and I think quite a lot of people who criticise the press will bring up examples like that of saying, clearly you're mates with that person, so, but I'm not sure how. You can't get rid of that. Obviously, yes, it's biased in some sense, but also people are biased, and you can't, you can't remove that entirely, I think, from people's reporting, because you can't remove it from people's personalities.
So is it the case really that we are dealing, when we talk about politics, with something that cannot ever be fully professionalised?
So basically, I do think that some tweaks could be made. One very obvious example is kind of, bullying, harassment, and all of that in Westminster. But then actually, no, that's a really interesting one, because for the longest time I've been convinced that, because one of the problems, and I've done some reporting on that, is that let's say an MP bullies one of their staff members. What can the staff member do? Because as it currently stands, staff are hired by their MP, so it's basically like 650 tiny offices, like tiny businesses, effectively. And so then I've talked, and it's happened to mates before, and they're like, okay, well, so my boss is bullying me, who do I complain to? My boss.
Right.
So, there's no one for them to go to. And yeah, something, for example, I've been saying for a long time is that perhaps there should be a system where actually it is the House of Commons, or a body attached to the House of Commons, formally hiring all the staff members. But of course, MPs still pick their members. MPs can still have a massive say on the salaries and probably have, let's say, like, a certain amount of money to spend for their office in general. And that can, either be two people on 50k or 3 on 33 or etc. So they can, work around that. And for me that seemed like such a no-brainer. But then I was talking to Jenny Willett, who's a former Lib Dem minister and who's now working with IPSA. We kind of talked about that topic, and I brought it up, and she was actually, so I need to research it, I've not had the time yet, but she was actually, something like that was tried in the Welsh Assembly. Did not work at all, so after a few years they had to go back to a model based on the House of Commons.
Okay.
And again, I've not, so I think that's basically, again, and I'm kind of, I guess I'm proving my own example here of actually a lot of things in Westminster. If you look at them, you're like, well, that's just very, very obviously not working. Why is no one doing anything about this? And then once you start looking into it, you're like, actually, you know what? It is quite rubbish, but it's the least rubbish option there is. Because everything is quite broken, but in a way that, it could always be even more broken. So I don't know. So I do think that, perhaps some tweaks could be made. But generally, I think the idea, and also fundamentally, like politics, I think a lot of people see it to be quite a cushy job, whatever. But especially being an MP, it's and that's the weird thing, especially since becoming a political journalist, I have so much more respect for MPs. Partly because I think when you get to meet a lot of them, you realise the vast majority of them are genuinely, like, fundamentally decent people trying to do the right thing. And whether I agree with them or not on what the right thing is, is a different matter. But also, you work absolutely endless hours. You're away from your family half the week, if not more. You basically don't really get days off. Especially now, you get abused all the time. It's not a fun job, and I think rates of divorce among MPs is like twice the amount, I think, of like the normal population and stuff like that. Like it is quite a shitty job. So, already, and I think already there are issues in terms of and we talk about it, I think, around every election of who would want to be an MP. Are we sure we're really attracting the best possible people who can be our lawmakers? Do you really think that if we make politics even more fun, that's how we'll get the best people to join it? Because also, and I think something people then realise that, MPs are just in it for the money and the power. From, and that's, obviously that's an issue, but as it stands, actually, quite a lot of the people who run to become MPs and become MPs, on all parties actually, could reasonably earn a similar salary elsewhere, I think. But also the power, and I think, and hopefully that's something that you can sort of tell from the book as well. You have very, very, very little power as an MP. Now, especially as quite a young backbencher, even actually as a junior minister, no one cares about you. No one cares about what you think. If there's something you think should be changed, no one's going to give a shit about it. So, there's not that much money and there's basically no power. So again, do we really want to make it even less attractive as a job?
Do you think that MPs suffer more mental health problems than the public is aware of?
There was a study on it, which sadly I can't remember, so I can't quote the figures off the top of my head, but they're clearly worrying figures. It was the first ever study on the mental health of MPs, and it was bad. And I think especially over the past 3 years as well, and actually quite a few MPs, stuck their head above the parapet, which I think was really brave of them to say, actually, I can't cope. And I can't remember which MP who was like, sometimes, I found the broom cupboard, and sometimes I go sit there in the dark with my jacket over my head, because everything else is too overwhelming. But I think it's also, and that's actually, for example, that's one of the things you can probably change. It's the fact that MPs are given very little training. So I think there's a bit more now than there used to be.
Right.
But until quite recently, broadly, and then there's quite a funny story at the very beginning of the book of Dennis Kinner first getting elected. And he won. Obviously, he was a minor, and then he won. And then, he was back at the pit the Monday after that, and his colleagues were like, what are you doing here? And he's like, am I meant to be there already? You're like, what goes on? No one's told me what to do.
Yeah.
So you kind of turn up, and actually the vast majority of people don't really have experience. And actually, even recently, so I've done quite a lot of interviews with the new MPs, and especially because I talk to quite a lot of the young ones, people who are my age broadly, so 27, 28, 29, and they're like, I have to hire an entire team now. I'm not entirely sure how I do that. Who do I hire? Who should I pick? What should I even advertise for? So lots of that as well, because again, there's so much, I guess, assumed knowledge or, assumed thing of you'll be able to figure it out, that I think, it can definitely be too much for quite a lot of people.
So let's talk about the current government. Do you think Dominic Cummings really has anything like the power to subvert the existing order that is projected onto him?
I feel like, I get immensely frustrated by the now never-ending circus of Dominic Cummings says a thing that's quite controversial, and this massive idea that he has for some area of policy or Whitehall or whatever, and everyone's all goes, oh my god, Dominic, he's so clever but also so revolutionary, oh my god, Dominic Cummings. And then, and it's announced a few days later the government is actually going to do about 10% of what, Cummings trailed first. And it's okay, we can just move on. Let's just move on in 3 days, do the exact same thing, go through the exact same process. What I will say about him is I think... I actually think Westminster has this obsession with the idea of someone... It's normally a man as well, let's be honest. Of this man who's so clever... the kind of Sherlock Holmes character, someone who's got this massive brain who can change everything and who will always, outsmart everyone else.
Misanthropic.
Well, no, exactly.
Eccentric.
And it's just quite weird, obviously, before Cummings, there was Nick Timothy, obviously, Peter Mandelson is kind of, one famous example of that. And I think Westminster love that. And I do genuinely think it is partly... there's going to be quite a neat conclusion, which I didn't even plan for, but I'm quite happy about it now. Is that actually if you work in Westminster, you're acutely aware of how much of a mess it is and how many people have no idea what they're doing and how close everything is to collapsing all the time. And I think that those people, as a result, end up yearning for, someone who actually, this kind of mythical person who's so clever, they know exactly what they're doing, and even if you don't agree with them, everything will be fine with them because they're so clever, they're going to fix everything. But that person never exists.
The dumplings were comforting. That note, perhaps less so. Marie Leconte, thank you very much.
Thank you.